A poor student who came to Beijing for studies had a wild idea. Today, he wanted to rent a Beijing courtyard house for 100 yuan, but the shrewd landlady just raised her eyelids and quoted a high price of 200. If he didn't want it, he could leave. Looking at the small and shabby room in front of him, without even decent furniture, he had no choice. This was already the cheapest place Xiao Ma could find. He thought he could still negotiate the price, but in fact, from the moment he stepped into the courtyard, the landlady had already figured him out completely. The location was good, so the price couldn't be too low. A poor student still wanted to park his bicycle. Helpless, Xiao Ma could only grit his teeth and pay most of his living expenses for the rent. Although the house was a bit run down, at least he had a place to stay. Their peculiar connection was destined from that winter. Afterward, Xiao Ma diligently tidied up inside and outside the courtyard. First, he blocked the holes in the walls that let in drafts, then he cleaned the glass repeatedly, and even swept the snow in the courtyard until it was spotless. Soon, the shabby little house looked brand new. The curious landlady occasionally came out to sneak a peek. Seeing the significant changes in the courtyard, she couldn't help but sigh that it was the first time in decades it had been so lively. Perhaps the gradual development of feelings lies in these trivial details, but when the landlady wasn't paying attention, the efficient Xiao Ma sold all the treasures in the house. When she returned, she was met with the landlady's death stare. Xiao Ma intended to find the scrap collector to get them back, but he found that the person had long disappeared. Xiao Ma had no choice but to hand over the money he got from selling them. Early the next morning, as Xiao Ma was about to wash up, he found the faucet was frozen. Seeing this, the landlady tapped the window with her cane, reminding him to pour some hot water on it. Xiao Ma obediently followed her advice. This trick worked, solving the water problem, but life's trivial matters were far from over. Xiao Ma wanted to borrow the landlady's kitchen to cook, but she demanded that he replace the gas in the future. Xiao Ma didn't argue and instead hurriedly bought an induction cooker. However, when it came to living matters, the landlady couldn't help but say a few more words. When she learned he bought an induction cooker, she laughed and said that the electricity cost was much higher than gas. As the landlady said, indeed, before a pot of water even boiled, the electricity meter was spinning as if it was about to fly off. Helpless, Xiao Ma had to unplug it. However, the hardships of a poor student were far from over. Without a phone, Xiao Ma wanted to call home. The old lady readily agreed, but as soon as she hung up the phone, she knocked on the table, asking her to pay, and charge the same as a public phone outside. Seeing the old lady calculating everywhere, Xiao Ma simply proposed to install a grading system, but the shrewd old lady wasn't so easy to agree. Finally, after Xiao Ma's persistent persuasion, the old lady was so annoyed that they both compromised. Upon learning that the old lady spends over 3 billion each month, Xiao Ma decided to let her pay 30, and he would cover the rest. The old lady didn't respond, but the stubborn Xiao Ma took it as her tacit consent. I think it's okay. With this move, Xiao Ma seemed to have the upper hand. Just like that, the old lady leaned by the window, eagerly watching him pull up the phone line. In that moment when youth and loneliness collided, it was already destined who would gradually compromise. Now, in the old lady's heart, she both hoped Xiao Ma would come and feared he really would. Here he comes again, nothing good. Xiao Ma wanted to borrow the refrigerator, and unexpectedly, this time, the old lady was surprisingly generous. Although she didn't mention money, she didn't want to lose out too much either. The old lady said she loved eating carp, and just one would be enough. This time, it was Xiao Ma who didn't respond. After he left, the old lady even opened the lunchbox to cautiously smell the food, checking if it had gone bad. At night, in the deep winter, it was getting colder. Even with the coat on, Xiao Ma was shivering with cold. So, early the next morning, he brought a big carp and visited again to discuss whether he could put a stove in the room. But the old lady flatly refused, because the room was too small, poorly ventilated, and there was a risk of gas poisoning. At such an old age, the old lady didn't want to get involved in this. Seeing that reasoning didn't work, Xiao Ma quietly bought an electric heater. To avoid electricity bill issues, he secretly pulled a wire from the old lady's room after she fell asleep at night. Although the room was warm, when he returned the next day, he found the phone line had been cut. An angry Xiao Ma confronted the old lady, only to be told that the phone rang in the middle of the night, disturbing her sleep. As someone who paid, Xiao Ma naturally didn't want to compromise. Little did he know, the stubborn old lady was completely unyielding. Xiao Ma, who had been suppressing his anger for a long time, couldn't take it anymore and rushed to reconnect the line. Unexpectedly, at this moment, the old lady chased after him, issuing a stern warning that if he dared to reconnect the phone line, he would have to pack up and leave immediately. Their conflict had reached its peak. Xiao Ma thought that since he paid the phone bill, the line shouldn't be cut. The old lady glared at Xiao Ma, thinking he was an ill-mannered child who would never find a man. Xiao Ma retorted that the old lady was so petty, no wonder no one wanted to take care of her. The two argued back and forth, neither giving in. After all, the old lady was over 80, and after a few words, she started feeling a sharp pain in her chest. Xiao Ma panicked for a moment and quickly ran inside to get water and medicine. But when the old lady recovered, she still wouldn't let it go and insisted that Xiao Ma move out by tomorrow morning. Xiao Ma could only say, "In the future, if you want me to annoy you, you won't be able to find me." Although Xiao Ma spoke tough, finding a place in the dead of winter wasn't as easy as just saying it. In the end, he could only swallow his pride and sneak back. When he reached the door, he hesitated for a long time but ultimately didn't push it open. At that moment, a family was moving out at the entrance. Their little dog wanted to follow but was almost crippled by a swinging door. In the end, it could only whimper as it watched its owner gradually leave. Thinking of himself as a stray dog soon to be homeless, Xiao Ma gave all his food to the dog and then mustered the courage to push open the courtyard door. But as soon as he entered the courtyard, he found that the small house had already been sealed. Xiao Ma sighed and went inside, ready to apologize, but was met with a torrent of abuse. The old lady was so agitated that her teeth fell out. It turned out that Xiao Ma was in such a hurry when he left that he forgot to turn off the electric heater. The heater's high power not only caused a power outage in the entire alley but also brought the police. If this old house caught fire, the consequences would be unimaginable. To remove the seal, Xiao Ma had to go to the police station and pay a 50 yuan fine. Knowing he was in the wrong, Xiao Ma could only silently accept the scolding. After leaving the police station, Xiao Ma felt like the sky had fallen. 2 months' living expenses were gone just like that. This time, he resolved to leave this stingy old lady. Now, the first thing to settle was the dog without an owner. He found a leisurely old man and lied, saying he had to run an errand and asked the old man to watch the dog for a while. The dog waited quietly by the old man's side, but Xiao Ma never returned. In the following days, Xiao Ma was busy looking for a place, and the courtyard welcomed new tenants. The new tenants were wealthy and voluntarily raised the rent to 500. But interestingly, the old lady was past the age of running around. Her life was quiet and dull. She had forgotten what loneliness was, and it was Xiao Ma who had stormed into her life. But now that he was leaving, she couldn't bear it. Originally, she had always been tough, but now she softened her stance and took the initiative to greet Xiao Ma. Although the old lady's words were full of reconciliation, Xiao Ma didn't acknowledge it and turned to leave to find a place to stay. But just as he was about to leave, a young man approached, stopping him in his tracks. It was the first time she realized that the old lady had family. However, she never imagined that this seemingly accidental encounter was actually arranged by the old lady. When Xiao Ma returned, not only was the phone line reconnected, but even the way they spoke had improved significantly. For the first time, she invited Xiao Ma inside to eat fruit, claiming it was all brought by her grandson, hinting at matchmaking between Xiao Ma and her grandson. This was the first time the old lady spoke for the two of them, but Xiao Ma absent-mindedly responded. However, the old lady took it seriously and turned to carefully inspect Xiao Ma's room, looking satisfied with the arrangement. After that, neither of them mentioned moving out again. As time passed, their relationship grew stronger. Occasionally, the old lady would joke with Xiao Ma, pretending she was going to get him a new house. But it turned out to be a small, dark, and narrow house. Humming and hawing, they both laughed it off. The old lady looked happy, but couldn't help being a bit pretentious. There were still several days until the new year, and the young man, unable to hold back, thought they could happily celebrate together. But in the blink of an eye, the old and the young were at it again. Xiao Ma received a phone bill and suddenly realized that last month's charges exceeded 300 yuan. He only asked the old lady why she secretly made long-distance calls, but she looked completely baffled. Both thought the other had made the calls, and as they argued, tempers flared again. Xiao Ma felt wronged, and the old lady felt unjustly accused. They decided to live separately. The angry old lady once again tried to kick Xiao Ma out, taking the opportunity to say so. Last time, I already agreed to give 500 to the new tenant. Now, Xiao Ma's heart was completely cold. Then he turned and rushed out of the house without looking back. The old lady didn't stay idle either. She turned around and tore off all the window decorations, and used her cane to knock down the lanterns. Still feeling unsatisfied, she stomped on the lanterns with her foot until they were completely smashed. However, when her grandson came back, she found out that the prank call was actually made by her own grandson. The young man didn't explain, just threw down 300 yuan and left. Knowing she had wronged Xiao Ma, the old lady felt more and more upset. Even when the new tenant came to pay, she sat silently in the room. No matter how hard the new tenant knocked, she wouldn't open the door. Seeing the mess in the yard, the old lady felt as if her heart was empty too. He quickly bought new lanterns and shakily hung them up again. When his old friend saw this, she couldn't help but scold him. How many more years do you think you have left? If you don't change your old ways, you'll end up lonely. Every day, the old lady sat at the door waiting, but Xiao Ma never came back. It wasn't until New Year's Eve that the old friend next door brought him his favorite big carp. But he had no appetite at all, just staring out the window, hoping Xiao Ma would come back soon. It wasn't until late at night that he finally saw him return. The old lady, as usual, knocked her cane and called out repeatedly, but Xiao Ma next door didn't respond. The old lady lowered her stance, came to the door, and kept knocking, no longer with her usual confidence, but with the fear of an 80-year-old's heart. Perhaps only the old lady knew that this was her way of expressing apology. Amidst the loud firecrackers, the grandmother and grandson quietly finished their reconciliatory New Year's Eve dinner. Winter had mostly passed after the New Year's Eve dinner. The old lady witnessed every joy and sorrow of the girl, and her late-life loneliness was greatly eased by Xiao Ma. One day, Xiao Ma brought back a rag doll. Looking at the old lady in front of her, she laughed so hard she couldn't stand up straight, insisting that the rag doll's expression was just like the old lady's. Time slipped by, spring came, then summer. Although the old lady still nagged, she no longer got truly angry. In the past, when using the refrigerator, Xiao Ma had to buy a big carp. Now, he simply moved the old lady's things out and put his own things in. The old lady couldn't help but complain, "This place has become yours." One day, while the old lady was napping, Xiao Ma forcibly pulled her up. It turned out the school had assigned a photography project. He wanted to document a day in the life of an old lady in Beijing. Xiao Ma is spontaneous. Just after having the old lady toast some bread, he immediately dragged her out to sunbathe. After all the fuss, he still felt something was missing. But the old lady is elderly, and the things she can do each day are limited, both boring and monotonous. Feeling unsatisfied, Xiao Ma asked her what else she could do. But life is inherently plain, tedious, and trivial, especially for a lonely old person. With no other choice, the old lady had to escape to the street, wearing an armband to pretend she was patrolling the alley. Her old friend found it amusing and joined in. Through the old friend's stories, Xiao Ma learned that the old lady was quite extraordinary in her youth. She had been a soldier, ridden horses across battlefields, and even smoked opium. In the second year of her marriage, her husband passed away, and she never had children. Her only daughter was adopted. Xiao Ma suddenly felt touched. She seemed to understand in an instant why the old lady was so strong-willed. In fact, she was more spirited and stubborn than young girls. But now, she's old and needs someone to listen to her. As the two whispered, the old lady shouted loudly, "What are you saying about me? I can hear you." At dinner, the old lady deliberately said the food didn't taste right, blaming Xiao Ma for disrupting her friend's cooking. Her old friend thought the old lady was just picking a fight. And so, after a day of fussing, Xiao Ma finally finished filming the video. He turned to leave and edit it, but the old lady seemed unsatisfied. When she heard there was no appearance fee and she wouldn't be on the radio, the old lady couldn't help but complain, "Then why did you bother me?" Life is always plain and full of bumps, but every time the old lady knocked her cane on the ground and shouted, Xiao Ma would come running energetically. One is nearing the end of life, the other is full of vitality. This doesn't prevent emotional bonds from forming, but the contrast in strength will eventually become unbalanced. The old lady went from being tough to compromising, and from compromising to being weak. Her gaze became increasingly dependent. Xiao Ma no longer treated the old lady as an outsider. Sometimes she would just lie in the old lady's room without any notice. To this, the old lady only complained a little but never stopped her. That day, after making sure the old lady was asleep, Xiao Ma quietly slipped out with her shoes. Then she climbed onto the roof and shook the birdhouse. Luckily, the old lady woke up in time, otherwise the little birds on the tree would have been in trouble. It wasn't until the old lady threatened to complain to the school that Xiao Ma quickly jumped down from the roof. Those little birds have been chirping and keeping the old lady company for over 10 years, so how could she let someone just take them away? Realizing his mistake, Xiao Ma could only keep making funny faces to cheer up the old lady. Then, he simply pretended to faint and lay down on the bed. The old lady put down the phone, unsure whether to laugh or be angry. She thought he wanted to eat eggs, so she brought him a bowl full of eggs to eat. After all, the eggs in the bird's nest still needed to hatch into little birds. However, Xiao Ma was unwilling to accept them, so the old lady had to change her approach. What if you break the roof, and when it rains, everything will be ruined? Xiao Ma had no choice but to climb onto the roof in the rain. The old lady stood below with an umbrella, smiling. Unexpectedly, the frail Xiao Ma caught a severe cold from the rain. The old lady complained, but she still asked her old friend to bring him some ginger tea to ward off the cold. But as soon as her friend delivered the ginger tea to the door, she turned back again. It turned out that a boy was already taking care of Xiao Ma. Curious, the old lady started gossiping the next day. "Why did you get up so late? Is that boy your boyfriend?" A few words made Xiao Ma blush. Even after recovering, he didn't stay idle. One day, he had a sudden idea to renovate the old lady's depressing house. However, after his grand rearrangement, the old lady had to ask him where everything was. Helpless, he had to restore the room to its original layout. Yet, Xiao Ma was still not giving up. Since he couldn't change the room's arrangement, he decided to decorate the walls. Soon, the old lady's room was covered with posters of sexy women. The room instantly became modern. But within 2 days, the old lady came back, hoping he would take down all the pictures of the women from the walls. Otherwise, she always felt uncomfortable. Finally, under the old lady's persistent pleas, Xiao Ma had to tear down those posters. But to lighten the mood, he insisted on leaving one up. Naturally, the old lady disagreed. Just as they were at an impasse, Xiao Ma saw one of the old lady's paintings by Li Jian and immediately suggested exchanging it for his own painting. Before the old lady could agree, he took her painting away. As a result, within 2 days, the old lady came back again. It turns out that the painting was the old lady's emotional support. Ever since it was taken by Xiaoma, she felt an emptiness in her heart, with no way to fill it. Xiaoma had no choice but to return the painting. Days passed by like this. But as long as Xiaoma was around, life was never too dull. One day, Xiaoma suddenly brought back a puppy. The old lady thought it would be better to have a child than to raise a puppy. So, every time her grandson came over, she eagerly tried to match them up. But Xiaoma didn't agree because she already had a boyfriend. However, that day, Xiaoma came back drenched from the rain. It was clear she had been crying. The old lady was worried and kept calling out from outside the door. But there was no sound from inside, and from that day on, Xiaoma disappeared. This made the old lady very anxious, so she asked around everywhere. Meanwhile, a young man squatted at the door for several days. To be the first to see Xiaoma, he even made a bed out of newspapers in the yard. It wasn't until 3 days later that Xiaoma reappeared. This finally allowed the old lady to breathe a sigh of relief. She hurriedly approached and gently inquired. Unintentionally, her eyes became moist because she had long regarded him as her granddaughter. Feelings between people are always scattered, indeed insignificant and overwhelming. Until the end, no one knows what they will truly have to endure. The uneasy wind blew summer away again. One day, the old lady's daughter suddenly came to visit. It was the first time Xiaoma had seen the old lady's daughter. Unexpectedly, she just left 2 big carp, said a few words, and left. Only the lonely old lady was left sitting alone in the house. Perhaps the only thing her daughter cared about was this big courtyard. Xiaoma saw this and felt the pain in her heart. In the days that followed, Xiaoma took meticulous care of the old lady. She not only often helped her wash her hair, cut her hair, and massage her, but also thoughtfully marked her food to prevent her from taking the wrong one. She even took the initiative to cook meals for her every day. The old lady ate the food and kept praising Xiaoma's cooking skills. But this time, Xiaoma didn't respond because her boyfriend had already found a place to live. And tomorrow was the day she was going to move out. The next day, she reluctantly packed her things, preparing to say goodbye to the old lady. But the old lady kept her back turned, unwilling to see her off. Xiaoma could only glance at her from the window, then turned and left in silent agreement. Like the old lady, she didn't know how to say goodbye. After the load, Xiaoyuan returned to its original state. The old furnishings in the house were like an elderly person's empty letter room. Usually, behind the old lady's bright and stern eyes, there was an elder's smile. However, after Xiaoma left, the old lady's eyes were filled only with unease, fear, and distraction. A few days later, Xiaoma returned to move the remaining things. The old lady, strong and leaning on a cane, came to the door of the small room, looking at the now empty room, her heart filled with mixed emotions. Then she turned around, tightly held Xiaoma's hand, and repeatedly, tremblingly asked, "Really moved out? Moved out just like that?" Xiaoma was silent for a while before saying, "I found a new house." But what he didn't know was that it wasn't the room that was emptied, but the old lady's heart. That winter, Xiaoma burst into his life with great vigor. This brought color to the old lady's days. But now, Xiaoma was about to burst out again, leaving only the lonely old lady behind. This completely broke the old lady's heart. Just a few days after moving out, Xiaoma received a call from the old lady's old friend. The old lady was moving to the countryside. Before leaving, she had nothing she couldn't part with, except she wanted to see Xiaoma one more time. Xiaoma hurried back to that small courtyard. However, by then, the old lady could no longer speak or walk. She just held Xiaoma's hand and gazed at him with gentle eyes. From the old friend, Xiaoma learned that since he moved out, the old lady had fallen ill. She would talk about Xiaoma all day long. It turned out that the old lady had promised her daughter that once her grandson got married, she would vacate the courtyard for her as a wedding house. Before leaving, the old lady still tightly held Xiaoma's hand, her eyes full of attachment and expectation. The adopted daughter, seeing this scene, couldn't help but make a sarcastic remark. She had never been so close to her own family, yet she was so good to an outsider. Although the old friend didn't speak, her disdainful look said it all. In the end, the two women pretended to inquire about Xiaoma's new house. Then, with a fake smile, they said, "Why don't you just take the old lady to your place?" Xiaoma understood what she meant and didn't argue with her. From then on, whenever Xiaoma had time, he would visit the old lady. Although she lived far away, this did not deter Xiaoma's determination to see her. Just like when they first met, Xiaoma burst in with great vigor. But they would no longer argue, just quietly holding hands, looking at each other. Every time, Xiaoma would bring a lot of things to the old lady who had fought for a lifetime. She couldn't help but burst into tears. At that moment, Pony's eyes also welled up. That winter, amidst the heavy snow, Pony received a call that the old lady had passed away. The noisy surroundings suddenly became eerily silent. In an instant, it felt like a huge stone was pressing on her chest. Time seemed to freeze at that moment. Her father sat on the ground, unable to catch his breath for a moment. She hadn't expected that the meeting with the old lady that day would turn out to be a final farewell. That day, she returned to the courtyard house, pushed open the big gate once more, and the bright red wedding character was particularly striking. In that instant, Pony suddenly remembered the scene of the old lady talking to her grandson. Once in winter, twice in spring, these 3 times came to mind, casually mentioned, came to mind, chatting about family matters. But ever since she learned that Pony had a boyfriend, the old lady never brought it up again. Suddenly, Pony seemed to understand something. You are a new beginning, and I am about to end. If Sun Shi were Pony, perhaps there would be no need to move out. If this happiness is complete because of me, then I will fulfill it. If I can't have it, then I will let it be. I only wish for your well-being. Grandson Pony and herself, this might be the best ending the old lady could think of. The Two of Us is a drama film directed by Ma Liwen, starring Gong Jae and Jin Yakin, released in 2005. The film uses the simplest shots to tell a story about loneliness and redemption. From initial confrontation to eventual dependence, their relationship is like a silent negotiation. The old lady defends her solitude with stubbornness, while the girl breaks this silence with recklessness. The director doesn't deliberately evoke emotions but uses the changing seasons to metaphorically depict emotional transitions. The cold confrontation of winter, the quiet thaw of spring, the passionate coexistence of summer, until the farewell and eternity of autumn. Those trivial arguments, the petty disputes over electricity bills, are precisely the most authentic texture of life. When the girl finally leaves the courtyard house, the old lady's mental world collapses instantly, making us realize that the deepest loneliness is not being alone, but losing warmth after having experienced it. The film exposes the invisible wounds of modern society. Nowadays, we are increasingly skilled at building skyscrapers, yet increasingly incapable of building bridges between people. The old lady represents the group forgotten by the times. Her courtyard house is a fortress of tradition and memory, while the girl is a reflection of urban drifters. Carrying dreams, yet with nowhere to place their souls. Their collision is actually a mutual redemption of 2 kinds of loneliness. The old man sees the vitality of life in the girl, while the girl learns to face the roughness of life from the old man. The most shocking power of the film lies in its telling us that true companionship doesn't require blood ties or reasons, but rather, at a certain moment, you realize that the other person's joys and sorrows have become a part of your life. The lives of the pony and the old lady are like a mirror, reflecting the wasteland within each of us. In this era where likes replace hugs and emojis replace tears, the film touches us with the most primitive emotions. Are we also using busyness to gloss over true feelings? The old man's unspoken concerns before his death, the girl's held back tears when she looks back, all remind us that the greatest regret in life is not what we can't do, but what we could have done. At the end of the film, the empty courtyard echoes only with the sound of a cane. But those shared springs, summers, autumns, and winters have long become an eternity beyond time. This might be the most precious gift the film leaves to the audience. In the fate of inevitable separation, we must still bravely give our true hearts. Because a brief encounter is enough to illuminate each other's long lives. After watching this film, don't forget to call a long-lost relative or show a little more patience to a stranger nearby. Because all earth-shattering stories begin with a simple hello. All the warmth that changes lives comes from an inadvertent pause. Well, that's all for today's movie sharing. Feel free to like, comment, and share. Looking forward to our next meeting.